Welcome to Roadmap, Auto Trader UK's product and tech podcast. And today I'm joined by two, not three, not four, not one, but two product designers, R. Kev and R. Rye. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
For the benefit of the audience, would Ryan like to make yourself known?
Yeah, I'm Ryan. I'm a product designer here at Auto Trader. I joined as an apprentice around, it's coming up on 3 years now.
Shut up.
It's gone fast. And yeah, I mean, I've been working on a lot of the finance stuff here, so I've had a bit of experience on both the portal and the consumer stuff, but we'll get into that later, won't we?
Yeah.
So.
And how long have you been here now, Kev?
So I've been here about 2.5 years now.
Heck, that's flown by as well.
Yeah, started on Valentine's Day of all days.
That's just before my birthday, that. Good day. Good day. February's a good month.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to remember, February 17th, if you ever want to get me a birthday card.
I'll remember that because it's the same date as my birthday.
Why, what's yours?
17th of September.
17th of September.
Yeah.
When's your birthday, Rye?
22nd of August. I can't join this club.
No.
Oh.
Well, you're like in school years, you're like one of the babies of the year, weren't you? Whereas Kev was like one of the elder statesmen of the year.
Yeah. If I was born 8 days later, I wouldn't be here in this office. I mean,
You never know.
maybe
You never
a
know.
bit
You
later.
never know. Interesting. We could go back into the childhood of Rye. But yeah, we said we'd talk today about your trials and tribulations. Is that how you say it? Yeah. Similarities and differences. I'm just looking at me. I've got like a script here. Like it's a bit of a. It's called alliteration. But anyway, for designing between B2C and B2B. So when you proposed this would be a good thing to talk about, I was like, is this like, no offense, but is this really a thing? Like, product design is product design, isn't it? Like, you're dealing with end users. Does it matter? Is it different? So yeah, that's over to you really. Like, what is your view? Is it different?
Yeah, and we had this exact question, didn't we,
Yeah,
before we were doing it, and we were thinking, is there actually that much to talk about? And then
Is this where we just wrap it after 5 minutes?
we're done. No. Yeah, and we were quite surprised, to be honest, how much you do without realising, like, what the differences are. I think, like, at that first layer of, as a designer, you're always thinking about the end user, their goals, and that sort of concept is still there. But then when you go that layer deeper, the situation is very, very different.
What do you
especially
mean? What do you
for
mean situation? Sorry.
Well, more so, we sell cars. If someone's on our autotrader.co.uk, that could be them making the second biggest purchase of their life.
Yeah.
And then when you go to the portal, it's someone doing the job. So from an emotional point of view and loads of other different point of views, it is just very different in terms of stakes and things like that.
So I haven't really thought, I mean, obviously we talk about being one of the biggest purchases, second biggest purchase in your life, but I've not really thought about it like on our portal tooling that is serving a purpose for someone's employment, and that's what they do, whether an employee or an owner, they've got tooling that they use.
Yeah, it's very different use cases, isn't it? Somebody's using it day in, day out and probably knows it like the back of their hand, and using it to add their stock to and price things and value things and manage what they've got on their forecourt, basically. Whereas as a consumer looking to buy a car, you might be excited that you're getting a new car, or it might be a necessity and you're trying to find the right thing to suit your needs. It's two very different journeys, I guess, and two very different emotional situations to be in. One might be exciting and the other one is just doing your day job, essentially. And
you had a really good analogy which I'm going to steal, which was like having a spa day versus buying a drill. It's like,
we still aim for a good experience regardless of which one it is.
Is this the same consumer? Is it when you talk about I'm going on a spa day or I'm buying a drill? The same
So
person?
like as a user, you've got experiences like buying a car, or you've got a tool that you use day in, day out.
Yeah.
I might buy a drill and I might be made up with my new drill because it drills holes through my really difficult wall really easily, and it's still a pleasure to use. I can change the drill bits really easily. It's got a lithium battery.
Yeah, it makes getting the job done
really easy and a pleasurable experience.
Yeah.
But that's a different experience to going on a spa day, for example, and being relaxed and being guided through the day and finding your new car in as calm and relaxing a way as possible.
Also, in a sense, like something you want to do. Like you choose to go on a spa day. You may not want to be drilling stuff as well. It's like, there is those differences.
Okay. I was just thinking, like, one of my mates, he's into drills. Like, I don't know. He bought one the other way from Screwfix. He was like, brilliant drill, this. I would never see him going on a spa day, though.
Well, maybe it's the other way around in that one.
So with that, though, obviously, like, think about the necessity. So there is then different emotions. But you said about the frequency as well. Is it, obviously, if you're doing your day job, you're doing things day in, day out, know it like the back of your hand. Is that a double-edged sword where it is a benefit and it's also not a curse, but also a challenge to think about?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's something I've encountered loads while designing for Portal, which is that these people, they're using this program like all the time, or this website. It's like it's a daily thing, and then obviously because they're using it so much, it's very easy to over time learn it.
You mean like 3 tabs that are there?
And they'll kind of have their own sort of way of setting it up, and it's almost like eventually, no matter how you design it, they'll come to learn how it works. Whereas, like, you look at the consumer side, you may have to guide people through that more, because it's not very often everyone's looking for a car or doing certain tasks. So if they're buying a car, it's obviously that journey of taking them through, like applying for finance or doing the part exchange. It's like you do have to sort of explain things a bit more.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, for a retailer, if we were sat there explaining every data point in a finance breakdown and stuff like that, or how to do a certain thing, after a week, that content on the page just becomes wasted space because they know how to do it.
Yeah. It's different expectations, isn't it? Like, as a car buyer, you may be coming to us, unless you're like a serial car buyer.
Yeah.
Then you may be coming to us every 3 years, every 5 years to get a new car. You would expect things to have changed between the last time you came on and the time you come on this time. So from a consumer point of view, it's trying to make everything as intuitive as possible, so it's easy for you to find the things that you're looking for.
Yeah.
I guess with the retailer, because they know it so well, there can be that little bit of a learning curve, because we are potentially trying to do more complicated things and communicate more complicated data, but they very quickly get used to that. And like you referred to, like that thing around, well, if I press tab 3 times, I'm going to end up there. Like, I've had jobs where you've had software that's slow, but you know the keyboard shortcuts, so you just invoice or whatever you're doing and press all your keyboard strokes, and then you sit and wait for the software. But people probably are that familiar with Portal. They probably know exactly what they need to click on, what they need to press, where they need to go. And that, like you say, is a blessing and a curse, because it then means if we make changes on the consumer side and we introduce a feature that somebody's not seen before but considers to be useful, they're just going to go, oh, this is great. Like, we've introduced dark mode recently on the app, and we've had comments from people saying, like, finally, this is great. Can't believe you've introduced this. This is fantastic. But then if we make changes on the retailer side and that affects somebody's workflow, that initially can be like a pain point and can cause a little friction. So it's like, although we're improving the overall experience, it can be sort of short-term pain for long-term gain.
Yeah. So like, how do you then, I mean, like, because I've not really thought about it around, because say I'm a consumer, like I use AT, I use other websites, but like you say, I use things for specific jobs at certain times and a level of frequency. So I think I bought my last vehicle like three or 4 years ago. So it's not something like, I'll do a bit of browsing and you do research because you're interested in certain things, but it's not going deep in the transaction. Whereas we've got tooling that we use internally, and internally hosted tools and external and tools that we buy in, but those are ones you use every single day. So even like, I think Slack moved the where your account is from like the top right to the bottom left, And it was a pain because I kept going to the top right, but then after 2 or 3 goes, now you go to the bottom left.
Yeah,
it's muscle memory just develops from like using it so much. And it's like Kev said, you want to make a change, it could be for like actually for like a long-term benefit, but you do find that like you will get an initial bad reaction even if it is a good change, just because like you said, you're using it so much, it just becomes like second nature. They probably don't even realize what you're actually doing consciously, and it's like moving the gear stick from the left to the right of the car. There could be a very good reason to do that, but you'd be completely thrown off because you're so used to the way it's set up.
So, I mean, like, right, you came in as apprentice, so like you started more on the consumer side, didn't you, right at the beginning, or did you start? I
actually started in Portal first and then moved over to consumer.
So did people like teach you, advise you this? How did you find that out? Because I mean, like, it's interesting, like, because we've talked on other ones around the difference between B2C and B2B, like from a marketing perspective. But say you've come in from a very B2C or consumer facing angle, and then the expectation is you do, full end to end. Is like, how do you find these things out? Is it just intuition? Is it by mistakes, or is it because the foundation of things are there and there's particular guide rails to work with him?
Yeah, there's a lot in that. There is more things you just learn over time. Like, you'll send things out and you see how it performs, and you can kind of learn like maybe what was a wrong decision to make and then go back and pivot on it. But I learned a lot from a lot of the other designers we have here, because the people who've been working on Portal typically have been here for a while, so they are like a fountain of knowledge. It's good to just work with them and pair with them on what you're doing. But I found like one of the biggest differences you'll see, and it kind of forces you to look at things differently, is the design system for both. So I know we did a podcast on design systems recently, but it's kind of that idea of like Portal kind of designs itself. It's very drag and drop, because everything visually, if you look on the pages of Portal, they are very similar, and each component in the list, it's like, it's all you need. It's got almost everything. So that skill of designing for Portal becomes more about how things are set up behind the scenes,
right,
and less about visually how it ends up looking. This is typically, obviously there's some situations where you do go more visual, but that design system sort of forces you to look at things a bit differently, because you aren't trying to convey a message like emotionally. You're more just looking at how can you get them to do this job as quick as possible.
Yeah.
And some of the success metrics you might have for a consumer project may not be the same.
Is that where, like, thinking like from like a Portal, from a tooling perspective, like consistency is key, unless we're changing things dramatically for like a major change where everything changes. But I assume that like consistency is one of those key values when designing for B2B, is something that we need to make it feel familiar for new things coming in. We can't suddenly go totally different, because that's going to blow people's minds.
Yeah, I guess one of the things we discussed, wasn't it, was around that if you're using Portal as a retailer, you're probably more likely to touch more areas of the site, whereas as a consumer, you might not look at leasing and new cars, or you might not look at leasing and used cars. So there can be some slight differences there, whereas Portal needs to feel consistent across its whole use base, I guess.
Yeah.
And like, I guess from my point of view, like previously I've always done more sort of consumer facing stuff, so more emotive and more creative, you could say. But then for me, it was, although you're still trying to improve people's lives and the overall aim is the same, there were still things that I had to learn that I'd not tackled before. So like charting and communicating data and things like that, they were things that I had to sort of, I guess, learn on the job. Like we need to communicate the value of this product. How are we going to present that data, and how are we going to do that in a way that people can understand it? So,
because I find it, I mean, like, it's funny because it's like another thing we talked about. I've done much more work in the retailer side while I've been at AT than anywhere else, really. That's like predominantly, or internal systems, done a little bit of consumer. And it's the bit, maybe it's the way my brain's wired, but I really like the consistency, like the speed. I get what you mean, like from a skill set, it's different, but there's still new skills, like you said, you have to learn around like graphing and data presentation. So I assume it from a designer perspective is the utopia that, because of the two-sided marketplace, that we look at the whole thing end to end, the consumer and the retailer, or do you prefer it where you specialize in a particular area space because the way your brain's wired?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because I started on Portal. I was doing sort of small changes to finance, and then there was more of a push for some of the stuff on the consumer end. So I started moving on to consumer that way, and it's kind of like I was going between each one with the priority of each project and the impact of each project increasing each time. Until recently, one of the projects I did actually had requirements for both. So that was the first time I got that parity of like doing both at the same time. And I think it really does help, even if you're not designing for both, having a really good understanding of both, because it's like you said, with this end to end, they will always impact each other. You know, changing one will always change the other. And we've used this analogy internally a lot, where this kind of like triangle of having the retailer, the consumer, and an auto trader at each end. And it's like every change, every project you do will impact one, and it might push one way, but then in doing that, it will also impact the others.
Yeah.
So even if you're just doing a project that's on consumer, it's really important you have in your head, how does this impact the retailers? How does this impact us? And then likewise, you're doing something for a retailer. Like I'm not going to get into the project I was on about because it'd take me half an hour to explain it, but it's
something like, right. Not revealing that secret. That's a bit of a sketchy one.
It is important to consider the whole end-to-end journey, isn't it? And to consider it as a service. So, like, we might not always be working on both sides of things. So I've done some Portal projects where somebody else has been, like, at the same time working on the front end stuff or the consumer facing side of the same thing, essentially. So in cases like that, it's making sure you're communicating and like making sure language is consistent so that you're facilitating those conversations between the consumer and the retailer.
Yeah.
So when the consumer rings the retailer to ask about delivery, they're not using one set of language from off our consumer facing site. And the retailer's looking at a Portal screen with inputs that have got completely different labels on and using different terminology.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I've seen that elsewhere where, not in AT, is where I've had a problem and I've rung up to a help desk and they're like, what are you talking? And then we realise the field that I'm talking about is not the field that they're calling it, something completely different. Yeah. So is that one of like the important, so even though we said like consistency is probably more important from a tooling perspective, rather than the consumer, but is there probably bits on the end-to-end journey, like the service experience for a consumer into like liaising with the retailer, that's where consistency or parity right across the pieces is super important.
Yeah. The better we can make that experience, the better that is for us, I guess. The more, I guess, through things like digital retailing and things like that, the more of the journey we become involved in, because previously, like back in the day, we were a magazine that you flick through, and now, like, some people would still say we could be considered just like a used car marketplace. But the more of the journey we involve ourselves in, so doing things like finance that Ryan's worked on and helping you do part of that journey online, the more responsibility we take for it and for that level of service. So the better we can make that whole journey and that handover to the retailer, the better that is for us, essentially, because we even previously, people would have said, oh yeah, I got my car off Auto Trader, even before we sold cars, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? And we're still tied into that experience in a very big way. So the more we can do in terms of designing the service, and the more seamless we can make that transition between digital and physical with the retailers, the better that is, I guess.
Yeah. And do you feel like, I don't know, going back to the differences, is the speed to live on a portal perspective? Because like you said, it not like quite drag and drop, but it's more consistent. RTDS is pretty mature. It's been around for a number of years. From a designer perspective and overhead, is it the speed to live quicker because some of the challenges you might have around opinion and others around consumer side just aren't there?
I'd say it's probably relatively the same. Depends on the project, but actually the time you spend on certain things would be different. Like what I was saying about the drag and drop, I think the design system's a bit it's not necessarily black and white, but it's more black and white than the consumer one. So any visual design queries you have are relatively quick to answer, like 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Consumer is, I find, obviously it feels a bit more subjective with opinions because it is more emotive and because it is more visual. That's where it's hard to quantify like what success is a bit more when you go into the realm of visual. So working with stakeholders and stuff, you can look at the visual side of it more, whereas like Portal, there is much more of a focus on like you said, efficiency and just getting the job done, and it's less around, does it look, I mean, it'll always look relatively aesthetically pleasing, but it's less around that sort of feeling you get from it.
I didn't think of that. So there is, just the weight of where, as a product designer, you put your effort and time, is the balance is different.
Yeah, like some of the projects I've been in for Portal, I remember I've spent like 90% of the time in whiteboarding tools, just working out how it works in the back end.
So is that to work out like the full flow as a end user,
and even just like not looking at pages as the elements on it, but what it's trying to do. So you might think this page does this. You're actually designing it by just having a label saying this is the page. Where does that take you to? As opposed to like consumer, where you will be spending more time in Figma and doing things like sketching and things like that.
Well, yeah, because I can ask you whether is the bits where your tooling background or your particular where you come from, do they, if our ambition is you can design the B2C or a B2B, you can design end to end, you can look beyond the boundaries of the website and into the real physical world and how people drop in to 80 and then leave and are in the retail's forecourt. But is there particular skills that if I rocked up tomorrow, you'd be like going, actually, probably where to start with, so you hit the ground running? B2B feels like a really good place because you're leveraging skills you've already got, or B2C is, so that then you sort of branch out into the other. Because obviously you said, Kev, you came from a consumer background.
Yeah, I think there's crossover, and there is different skill sets. Like Ryan said, Portal almost is easier to put together in terms of there's less consideration about the visual because those things are already almost predefined. Whereas consumer, there's a little bit more creative freedom and a little more room to push things a little bit and try and create new experiences. But there's still crossovers between the two, and I'd say like one of the biggest ones is sort of storytelling. You still got a narrative. Like some of the Portal things I've worked on have been sort of demonstrating value of products and things like that, and you're still trying to tell a story. You're still trying to communicate something to the retailers. It's just that your tools are slightly different. So it might be charts and graphs and ways to show how something's performing. But yeah, as opposed to maybe nice visuals and white space and things like that you'd get on the consumer side. But it is still that narrative that you're trying to build through a page or through an experience.
Yeah. And is the content like the tone of voice? I think we talked with marketing about this as well. It feels like there's similarities, but again, differences. Is it that when you approach it with your content colleagues, like, is the different things what you what you talk about and how you present on the consumer, especially finance. Does it feel different in the two? Feel similar but different?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that pops to my head is like, for example, when you finish your order on Deal Builder and Consumer, we're like, order place, you've got all these celebration things. You wouldn't do that on Retailer. We just say, you've done it, your order's complete, and that's it.
Job
it's
done.
like, because, there are those moments of delight you're looking for on the consumer one. And I think, I find you definitely have to lean on content designers more on consumer side, because that tone of voice is where it's a lot more important. With Portal being more functional, it's just you're trying to just tell as much information in as little words as possible, just straight to the point. Whereas, like a good example being finance, we have loads of different help content and things like that on breakdowns and explaining jargon and breaking down what things actually mean. Whereas Retailer, it is what it is. And I think it comes into a level of of knowledge as well. We can't assume everyone coming onto the consumer site is a petrol head and knows all these different terms, whether that be finance or even to do with cars and vehicles. Whereas you can sort of make that assumption on Portal because they are working with these things day in, day out. It is their specialty.
So this is probably going a bit abstract on the angle, but obviously we're doing more and more where we are actually, dealers don't just use Portal, retailers don't use Portal, they also use other third-party tools that we integrate with. So where does the design sort of cut off end? Because obviously that's where we're getting into, there's labels and the way we call data, the way we speak about data, because you might, I assume the level of control we have suddenly starts to wane at that point.
Yeah. I'd say it's another difference between the two in that, obviously using APIs and things like that and allowing retailers to leverage our data with third-party systems. In some ways, retailers get more input on what we do and how we do things than a consumer would. A consumer will do user testing and will try and make a decision that's based on data and try and do the right thing. Whereas potentially if we had a large retailer that said we need something that does this, then we'd potentially try and facilitate that. So they almost get a little more input and we will try and help integrate our stuff into third-party systems more, which is just, again, it's a different type of design, isn't it? It's more service design rather than any UI design or visual.
Yeah, very, because it does feel like that's one of the bits where we have talked about recently is understanding how data is being presented in other third-party systems, and does the nomenclature they use, does it marry up so that when we're talking about particular data points to a retailer, that it's the same data points when they're looking in their own tooling, or like you say, if a consumer's talking about a particular thing that they're seeing on Auto Trader, that the language that the retailer's using is consistent.
That's another place where the language is the tone of voice is different. You need to be very specific on Portal, especially with, like you say, when you're presenting data, because data can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. So it's important that we're very clear and very transparent on what the data is actually showing, so that there's less grey area, I guess, for people to interpret it to show maybe what they want it to show. And we get different, we have to design for different users as well, and different levels of ability when it comes to data. So some people might be less used to using data and a bar chart is great, but then we'll have others that love to dig into the analytics and the data and will really use that to make business decisions. And it's trying to provide something that's usable for somebody who's less familiar with analyzing data, but then also providing the functionality for that person that does really want to dig into it deeper. We say it's a little bit like a TV remote. You've got your main functions that are turn the volume up and down, turn it on and off, change the channel. But then for the expert user, there's also a load of buttons on there that like 90% of people might never touch, but those 10% find them really useful and really lets them like fine tune things the way they want to.
So that's interesting, that, because is it then the challenge, or the one where it really stretches your brain, is around the presentation of data? Because I've not really thought about that in any way.
I found that tricky.
Yeah.
Because to me, it was just like, I've never done any of this before. Like, how do I communicate all these data points in a way that somebody can look at them and understand them? And how much is too much? Like, at what point does somebody that's really familiar with maths and graphs go, oh, this is fantastic, but then the other 90% go, I have no idea what's going on here. Like, it is, and again, it's that storytelling. It's how you break that narrative down and how you communicate those things. And I found it tricky. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like back to the point before around learnability. It's like this really complex graph, for example, of data. When you first start implementing that, there is that learning curve.
Yeah.
And it's like if you from a design point of view, if you lean too much onto the learnability point of view, that you may then get to the point where once you know it, the tool isn't powerful enough.
Yeah.
And there is a balance there. And I think, it can be a difficult balance to strike. Definitely. I luckily haven't had too much experience doing graphs yet, but
graphing.
Never
thought we'd get into talking about graphing on
a
podcast about product design.
Data presentation.
Yeah. So if you had to lean towards one or the other, like, do you, if this was like your two parents or whatever, sounds awful. No, we're not going to go down that one. But like, have you got a favourite? Like, if you could pick one or the other, would you pick one over the other, and why?
Personally, I'd probably lean towards consumer, just because of my background, my more visual background. Like, I've done product photography and things like that, and like interests in typography and things like that, and like it feels like we get to push a little more on there. But I do also like the challenges that you get with Portal and that opportunity to learn new things like data communication and things like that, and things that I've not had to tackle before. I think it's good to work across both.
I was gonna say, I feel like I need mentally a bit of both to keep my brain stimulated. I really enjoy working on both. I think I find I'm usually more happy with the end product on Portal, just because it usually feels just a bit more complete. I don't know, I just naturally gravitate towards it. But yeah, I feel like at the same time, there's no better feeling than like actually doing something on consumer, because you can show people. It's like you can't can't really show off much of Portal to like your brother or anything like that. Whereas like something goes live on consumer, there's a bit more of like a user base that's going to experience that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, because I mean the volume it uses, like
it's massively different.
It is so different, but because I mean, like I said earlier, because I've got a mathsy background, I tend to like when we look at Looker and things like that, I tend to enjoy, and when you see Portal and how people can move through it so quick. So, and maybe that's because I'm not very creative, so I do find consumer land. I mean, it's fascinating and really nice to look at, but if you ask me to go and look at a consumer problem in whatever state, that sort of blows my, especially because of the breadth of the population using it. I find that mind blowing. Whereas Portal and APIs, things like that, it feels like it's a more manageable thing. And maybe that's because I like graphs. Well, apart from pie charts, don't like pie charts. Cool, right. Well, cheers for that.
No worries.
Thank you.
That was another interesting one. So, Kev, this is your second time doing a little podcast. Is it your first?
It's my debut.
Look at you, right. Been here 3 years. International Man of Mystery. Awesome. Well, I definitely need a brew. I'm absolutely goose today. So I'll wrap it up there. Thanks to the listeners and viewers for sticking the kettle on. Hopefully I'm a brew while tuning in to another episode of Good Old Roadmap. And remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. Hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. And follow us on good old Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And that's us done for today. Cheers for that.
Awesome.
Thank you,
See
Pete.
you.